It's OPB Politics Now for Friday, July 21st. Last November, Portlanders approved a ballot measure to reshape the city's structure of government. The voter-approved proposal has yet to fully take effect, but the politicking started long ago and has continued unabated. On this week's Politics Now, we'll talk about the new form of government, whether it will be implemented before it's overhauled, and what insight the current dust-up has to offer about the upcoming election. I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
I'm OPB Portland City Hall reporter Alex Zielinski.
Alex, let's just take a step back and remind people here about the measure that voters approved last November that is supposed to overhaul the current form of government.
Right. So that ballot measure laid out a plan to expand city council to 12 people, divide Portland into 4 political districts, and introduce a ranked choice voting system. Under this model, 3 commissioners would be elected to represent each district, and city commissioners would no longer oversee city bureaus, which they do right now, and instead solely focus on passing legislation. It also removes the mayor from having a seat on council, which they do right now. The mayor will only intervene to cast a tie-breaking vote in council decisions. And all of this needs to be in place by the November 2024 election.
Most people agreed it was time for Portland to have a new form of government. The current form is antiquated. The city of Portland is the only city of its size that has elected officials that oversee the management of bureaus. But at the same time, the measure that voters approved, it's pretty convoluted, and it had some critics right from the start.
Yeah, that's right. Portland's commission form of government has been a point of contention for decades, so much that attempts to overhaul it made it to the ballot, I think, 8 times. But it wasn't until last November that the majority of voters agreed to do away with it. But even the lead up to that election drew a lot of debate. You know, while most people were in agreement that a more representative government was necessary, they were also worried that introducing a brand new form of voting would be too confusing. And some thought the city needed more than just 4 districts. And even some elected officials were opposed. Commissioner Mingus Mapps was prepared to bring another proposal to the ballot if the previous measure failed. And both Mayor Ted Wheeler and Commissioner Dan Ryan raised concerns about it.
So this week, Portland Commissioner Renee Gonzalez and Dan Ryan partnered up to propose a plan to get several measures on the ballot that would change key parts of the voter-approved plan. So what do the commissioners propose?
Yeah, they were interested in 3 separate measures. One was a proposal to allow future Portland mayors to have veto power over council actions. Another would downsize the number of council members from 12 to 8. And the third would choose a more tested form of ranked choice voting than what voters approved last year. They argue that voters deserve another chance to assess the impacts of last year's measure, even though it hasn't fully gone into effect yet. Here's how Gonzalez put it.
And when we look at these charter changes, we at least want to take a pause, reevaluate what voters approve, and whether there's anything we would submit to voters for clarification on their intent.
But to get those proposals on this fall's ballot, they needed the support of at least one more commissioner.
And what kind of response did the proposals get from the public and also the other city commissioners?
Yeah, we heard a lot of skepticism at the council session earlier this week from city employees, members of the public, and city commissioners. Both commissioners Mingus Mapps and Carmen Rubio weren't convinced that advancing these proposals was wise, and Mayor Wheeler questioned the message his colleagues were sending to the public who approved last year's measure. Here's what he said.
At the end of the day, the question for me is, do we trust the will of the voters or don't we? This is not the opportunity for elected officials to tell the public how we think they should be governed.
This opposition was kind of notable coming from Wheeler, who in the past has raised a lot of the same concerns raised by Gonzalez and Ryan.
Okay, so the response from commissioners and the public was not great. So Gonzalez changes course.
Yeah, so the original plan was for Gonzalez to bring all these measures to council for a vote next week. But after that council session, where he got a lot of feedback, he and Dan Ryan backpedaled. Now none of these measures are advancing next week. Gonzalez instead chose to drop 2 of the proposals altogether. And now he's saying that he'll bring the single proposal to allow for a mayoral veto later in the year in preparation for a spring ballot.
Okay, there's a lot of back and forth here. So just to clarify, where are we at now with this whole transition to a new form of government?
Yeah, great question. So since January, city staff have been working to make sure everything is in place for this big transition. That means getting election systems perfected for the new form of voting, renovating City Hall to make space for a larger city council, and making sure the city budget includes the costs of this big transition. And at the same time, a number of volunteer groups that have been appointed by the city have been working to fine-tune some details, including folks helping draw a map that divides the city into 4 districts, and another group that's planning on how much elected officials should get paid. Decisions on at least those 2 things will be finalized by the end of August.
Alex, as an outsider looking in, this whole process feels messy. Is it messy? Is that fair? And why does it feel this way?
It's so messy. But it's also kind of a familiar kind of chaos that I see a lot in local politics. It's politicians misjudging how much support they have. It's maybe floating a risky or ambitious idea just to see where it lands and hoping it comes off as a win. And it's politicians trying to build partnerships with other politicians and then realizing that person really doesn't have their back. At the same time, it's a little unique because this chaos is all happening before a major unpredictable overhaul to our city's government. This transition could threaten a lot of these politicians' power, too, so they may be pulling out all the stops in anticipation.
What does this episode tell us about the Portland City Council at this moment? And are there other policies or other voter-approved plans that could also be subjected to something like this, where there's basically this open debate on council about whether voters knew what they were doing?
Yeah, so right now we're seeing a council where the majority of its members were elected during kind of perhaps the most uniquely unstable years in our city's history. Many feel they have a mandate from voters to get things feeling a little bit more secure coming out of the pandemic, the economic downturn, and on the heels of racial justice protests. And like I said earlier, they're all headed towards another period of change. So there's been a lot of looking in the rear view, especially when it comes to ballot measures approved by voters in recent years. For example, in 2020, voters passed a measure to create a new oversight and accountability system for Portland police. And the work to establish that new department has been underway for a few years. But at a recent council session, commissioners questioned whether it's still something voters want and hinted at changing a few key parts of what was approved. So what happened this week isn't really an isolated incident. It really seems like politicians feel empowered to tinker with recent voter-approved programs.
Okay, well, I cannot believe I'm saying these words out loud, but we are fast approaching the November 2024 election, and it will be the first one held since Portlanders voted to change the form of government and the election system. What can you tell us about what we should expect?
Yeah, it's wild to see that this is already taking shape. So what we know for sure is that Commissioner Mingus Mapps is running for mayor. It's been rumored that every other city council member, including Mayor Wheeler, is also interested in joining that race. And I think we're about to see a lot of folks come out of the woodwork to run for city council once the district lines are finalized. So then people will know kind of which district that they will represent and which one they'll run for. The same goes for information coming out of, the Volunteer Salary Commission, which will set salaries for commissioners. I think I've heard that a number of folks are newly interested in running for council now that they know that they might get a significant pay hike based on kind of what this commission is suggesting. There's also a number of organizations doing candidate training and outreach to kind of make sure there's a big slate of folks who run for office and that we can pick from. So I feel like we'll start to see some people emerging by this fall.
Okay, well, let's leave this conversation here for now because we have a lot of fun conversations ahead of us. Alex, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
This week's episode was produced by Andrew Thien. Our audio engineer is Nalene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. While you're there, why not click the big red Contribute Now button and become an OPB member? You can also rate and review us in your podcast app of choice. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.